Good morning, everyone. Ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests. As the President has informed you, I am one of the lawyers specialized in domestic violence with Legal Aid Agency Malta. And my speech today is going to explain to you a bit like what we do, what we cover, and what kind of support services the agency gives, right? So, Legal Aid Malta Agency is a state-funded agency providing legal assistance to the less privileged and vulnerable people in society. Moreover, it is the safe place for victims of abuse to get assistance, primarily advocacy and support services. The agency has thus a dual role, that of providing free legal assistance to the accused or alleged perpetrators, and also gives free assistance and support to the victims. The agency is thus very well aware of the sensitivity of its obligations towards its clients. Based primarily on the Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for victims of crime and abuse of power, the agency endeavors to give an expeditious, fair, and accessible service. The services provided to the victims of crime are various. I will mention most of them. An immediate, private, and confidential consultation with our residence legal aid lawyer, who provides advice to the victims of crime, informing them of their rights as well as to reply to any questions or queries. Appointments are scheduled in a way to provide ample time to the client to discuss with the resident legal aid lawyer. The provision of specialized lawyers to advise in domestic violence cases. A safe office where victims can feel secure to confide with their lawyer all issues leading or that may have given rise to their situation or incident. With the client's consent, the agency then offers to refer them to other governmental or non-governmental entities to be assisted on other matters. They are assisted to identify thus their options for help, to reach safety and become educated about what the next steps should be in the aftermath of experiencing violence. Thus, indirectly through the assistance of these other entities, they are also given relocation assistance. The agency has, in fact, a memorandum of understanding in place with the Foundation of Welfare of Social Standards and also with the Victim of Support Unit of the Police Department, in order to create further enhancement of collaboration to achieve a holistic approach, enabling effective communication between the entities to provide for, as much as possible, the needs of the victim. The agency tries to follow, as much as possible, the once-only principle, so that the client would not need to relive his traumatic experience. It also has a declaration of cooperation with the Victim Support Agency, providing for a formal adoption of a common referral system to provide for the victim's psychosocial aspect. It offers support, thus, assistance in court, which also includes the request of restraining and protection orders. Legal aid lawyers are also informed and advised to attend workshops and training about this very sensitive area. Moreover, our agency provides also emergency assistance on a 24-hour basis. The lawyers appointed and specialized in the domestic violence are available 24 hours on call to assist the alleged victims as much as possible. They are guided by the lawyers that ensure first and foremost their safety and also their rights according to law. As reports have to be filed with the police, many would of course not know what happened next, and thus the whole procedure is calmly explained to them, and they are advised their options and guided throughout. They are also offered the service of being assisted by a lawyer once they are required to testify in court. Lawyers are obviously covered by professional secrecy, and I have realized through all my experience that a very important factor is not only advising them on legal matters, but also having the human and social aspect and approach by listening to them to allow them to express their fears and emotions at that point in time. It is imperative, in fact, that one understands that there is a human being suffering and in a state of fear on the other side of the line. Therefore, she or he needs to first be calmed down by the lawyer answering her or his call, and this is done by having a calming approach and attitude, seeking to assist wholeheartedly the alleged victim on the other end. These emergency services are free of charge, except for civil proceedings that they might choose to opt for. In the latter case, however, they are also assessed to verify whether they also qualified for this kind of free legal aid. Legal Aid Malta strives to continue to improve the provision of its services for a fair and equitable justice to the benefit of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for outlining the wonderful services provided by Legal Aid Malta and also, again, for the financial contribution to our event. Our next speaker has arrived, our opening speaker has arrived, so without further ado, I will introduce you to the Minister for Justice for Malta, Jonathan Attard.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to address you this morning. I know you had a productive day yesterday, and I hope today's proceedings will be fruitful too. Please allow me to add my welcome to those of you who have traveled to our country, Malta, especially for this conference. We are pleased to see you, and I hope your stay is proving to be enjoyable and that you will return to our country. I admire the fact that you are tackling big issues head-on, from the pandemic situation to the war in Ukraine, and while COVID-19 created endless news headlines and engulfed us all, there were underreported stories too, those of victims of domestic violence caught in the suffocating environment of the lockdowns and stay-at-home orders. And thank you for giving these people a voice. And as Europe comes to the aid of refugees fleeing to Russian bombardment of Ukraine, you are right to highlight the risk of human trafficking. Literally, millions of people are on the move, and the risk of exploitation is evident. Strategies are needed to ensure vulnerable people are not exploited. Our belief is in the need for coordinated action across Europe. For our part, we are transposing into our criminal code the Victims of Crime Directive, and we look forward to the upcoming revision of the directive in Brussels. We believe it is of the utmost importance that victims of crime can enjoy the same rights, whatever their nationality and wherever in the European Union the crime takes place. It can be difficult for victims to exercise their rights and obtain support and practice in cross-border cases. But we say that when it comes to providing protection and support, there should be no barriers. We have always fully supported EU legislation in this regard, and the European Union has adopted several EU legal instruments setting up common rules on victims' rights, financial compensation, and substantive law instruments regarding trafficking in human beings. We shall continue down this road. I should also add that we have raised our game here in Malta with the Victim Support Agency and a unit established within the police force following up on victims of crimes. And the Labour Party's manifesto, the party in government here in Malta, which now is our work plan for this legislature, stipulates a number of proposals to increase protection and assistance to victims of crime. And as a government, we are committed in expanding the law on the use of electronic monitoring. This corrective tool will not only help rehabilitate anyone, but will provide more reassurance to the community and victims of crime. We are expanding our horizons to deal with the modern reality of cybercrime and cyber harassment by introducing the necessary legislation to aid and protect the victims. And furthermore, as Dr. Juliana Ferrante rightly explained before my intervention on behalf of Legal Aid Malta, which falls under the remit of the Ministry for Justice, We'll go further into detail to expand the services being offered by this agency. And the Legal Aid Agency will continue to cooperate with other government bodies with a view to further expanding access to legal assistance among victims of crime. All crime has a cost, and there are too many victims of crime. We need to divert would-be criminals towards an honest path, and we need to ensure those who do commit crime are brought to justice. I wish you well in the deliberations today. You are playing a vital role, and I thank you for all that you do, and good luck for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister can't join us for the rest of the day, so both him and Dr. Juliana are leaving now. So that takes us on to our first plenary session of this morning. Both the Minister and also throughout the event, you'll have heard us all referencing the COVID pandemic, and obviously it had significant impact in many ways in all of our lives, but also included in that is the significant impact on the services and victim support services and how they were provided. So this first plenary session will look at the impact of COVID, the responses of the organisations to that. We are joined by members of Codice, I'm saying it wrong again, Codice from Italy, and also from Victim Support Malta as well. And we also have someone from the Maltese police who is going to be talking to us about the data that really indicated the increase in domestic violence that was witnessed, I think, across the world in times of lockdown. Moderating this morning's event is our dear friend, Frida Wheldon from Victim Support Sweden, and also a member of Victim Support Europe's board. So I'd like to welcome you all to the floor.
Good morning. I hope you enjoyed yesterday as much as I did. What a wonderful day, and also a fantastic dinner. I agree with you, Jerry. That was absolutely amazing. So lovely to see you all here today. As we've heard, today's panel session will be about the need to remain flexible and adjust our service delivery to circumstances that we find ourselves in, both during COVID and no doubt during future adjustments we may have to do in the future, depending on what happens in our surrounding areas. Our first speaker today is a clinical supervisor and a psychotherapist. She's worked both within the mental health and communication industries. Let me welcome Juliana Grima to the floor as our first speaker. Thank you.
Hi. I'm really nervous. I've made myself physically ill over the past week in anticipation of addressing you guys. I'm going to use my phone to put a timer on because I'm really apprehensive of time. So I'm going to start now. I'm going to talk really fast as well. And I might steal some of the time of Sylvana specifically. I'm starting. Okay. So first of all, my name is Julianne. One thing I wanted to clarify, because I assume some of you might wonder why on such a small island we have two VS. So there's VSM and VSA. VSM is an NGO that started in 2006. It's funded by fundraising and the Ministry of Family and Children, and anyway, the name is very long. And we try on a sort of semi-regular basis to collaborate with the Victim Support Agency. Victim Support Agency is an agency that is government run. So there's a very big difference between the two of us. Okay, so the name of the conference is Resilience, the Age of Resilience. Yesterday when I left the conference, I felt a bit deflated. I don't know if you guys have this experience, but you know when you're on LinkedIn and you scroll and you see how everyone's having their best professional life, And that's how it felt yesterday. I thought, oh my God, it was probably only us, who did like really shit, because we were all over the place and we were kind of shifting from mania to depression. It was like a very bipolar, schizophrenic experience, this whole COVID. But let me tell you a bit about the NGO. So VSM, I joined about 8-9 years ago. I joined as a freelance therapist, one of those therapists who gave a reduced rate to help the NGO out. And I fell in love with victims of rape and sexual assault. Not literally, it's just the work. And from 1 to 10, I just took on as many clients as I could. At the time, the NGO had 1.5 staff members and 3 board members. Over the past 6-7 years, my role grew. I became a supervisor to the 1.5 staff members, and then I joined the board, and then my predecessor, Roberta, said, I'm leaving, here you go, take my baby. And I haven't forgiven her since. It's been a very rocky ride. But I have to say we've done very well. So from about 40 clients, we now number into the 300-400. We have 5 core team members. We sweat blood and tears to keep this going. We have about 12 freelance therapists, about 25 interns, 3 psychiatrists, 2 teams of lawyers, 3 supervisors. And it might not sound like a lot, but it's a lot to us because we started with very little. And we kind of started in minus financially, and that's very often where we end up. So COVID was a bit of a mindfuck because it was a parallel process. We're a group of therapists and people who really struggle to keep our shit together sometimes. And it was a parallel process because our clients were not only victims of crime, but they were going through this pandemic, and it was a shared trauma because we were going through it too. So we were losing family members, and our partners and our parents' businesses were closing, and a lot of the service providers who were accepting reduced rates couldn't afford to keep going with us. So we developed a high turnover of staff. People we had trained for 3-4 years who we trusted said, I need more money right now. And that was difficult. So we went through the stages of bereavement. We're in denial, like this is never happening in Malta. We're so small. It just go over us. And then when we had cases in Malta, we thought it was just going to be short. We're Maltese. This is kind of the attitude we have here. We're Maltese. The pandemic doesn't give a shit about us. It's just going to keep going. And then we were in lockdown, and we started to get angry at our neighbors. And then we started to bargain, and we bought a lot of bolognese sauces in jars, which I still have some of because, it was the end of the world. And then we got really tired because we were doing a lot of this in isolation. And so our little core team with people leaving and having to recruit during COVID was awful. And we were very tired. And in the blink of an eye, like this, look, blink. That's how long we had to develop services to adapt to what our clients needed. Imagine 300 clients needed support, and we had no access to them. So we had, what I'm assuming many of you did, we had these long conversations and arguments and grinding of teeth about how ethical it was going to be to provide services online. And should we message? And are we trained? And we spent days debating, are we qualified to do therapy online? And in retrospect, it was a fucking stupid thing to do because, history teaches you, in the long run, we were messaging clients, emailing them, smoke signals, because really we just had to reach people. And the victims we had who were living with perpetrators, they were living a very complicated experience. And so providing support wasn't even about the medium anymore. It was about presence. So there was this parallel process of wanting to be present, problems with fundraising, courts closing, clients going bananas, we were going bananas, and we kind of survived. I'm doing really well. I think I've done 3 pages in 5 minutes. Am I talking really, really fast? Do I sound manic? No? Okay. So the courts closed, and that was awful because obviously a lot of the clients we had, especially the sexual assault and violent crimes, not only were their cases not going to open, but the ones that had opened and we were coming to the close of them, their PTSD was triggered because we knew that the perpetrators, or the alleged perpetrators at the time, were going to be out for much longer because even after the pandemic, we knew that the courts were never going to catch up with this backlog of cases. We were already dealing with the backlog of cases before the pandemic. And then, as many of you know, domestic violence just skyrocketed. And we felt very ill-equipped. So that's what yesterday felt like a bit to me, because you guys are all talking about how successful you are and all the great things you did. And I think it's important to have a positive voice. I'm like, in Italian we'd say l'uccello del malaugurio, I'm like the negative person. I'm a realist, so I really wanted to talk to you today about how short our memory can be and how a lot of us are traumatized. And yes, we provide support and we support each other, but I don't know when our PTSD is going to manifest. Because we have been in therapy and group therapy, and we've been really smart. We've been as smart as all of you. But I can say for myself, I'm in shock. I'm in a conference, we're talking about resilience, but I don't think it's hit me yet. And there hasn't been time for our team to rest. We have not stopped. We've not closed our doors to say, guys, clients, we're taking 2 months off because we need to regroup. We just keep doing it. And along with providing service, we also support our families and our friends and each other. I saw a quote on Facebook and I stole it. I don't know who said it. So just pretend I came up with it. It says, "We survived because the fire inside us burned brighter than the fire around us." And I can say hand on heart that for us, the people I work with, this is definitely true. And my assumption is that I spoke to a few of you. This is very much the case with most of us, I think, who are here. It's not about money. I mean, it is a lot about money because we don't have it, but it is not about money. It's very much about vocation. And what we do is because we have our own issues and our own background, and we want to make use of that to help people who are going through traumas that we are trained to do. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. What a passionate insight into your organization. It's clear you love what you do, and I think you also really highlight the importance of looking at the supporters as well, supporting the supporters so that we ourselves can also get through the activities at the moment. So thank you so much for that insight. Our next speaker today is Dr. Vittoria Doretti. She's a specialist in cardiology, anesthesia, and intensive care. She's going to give us the health perspective of looking at a coordinated response to emergencies. So, Doctor, over to you.
Thanks, Frida. Thank you. Thanks to the VSE organizer for the invitation, President, Marina, Josette, and to all of you begin at the conference. And Martina Focardi, forensic pathologist of the Rose Code team, who is here with me. It's very special. We decided to show you the preview of the update Rose Code. Rose Code is good. No pink code. No pink code. No pink. No pink code. Rose Code, flower, white rose. Video documentary today. It tells the story of Rose Code, of the Rose Code team, and its evolution during the last 12 years, using imaging for 2009 today. They are no actors, only us, playing each one our role in real life. You can see the begin. I had short mahogany hair, and B, the hand, I got long blonde, white hair. In between there has been the war, missions, 100 night spent in ER, joy, sorry, even in the pandemic. In March 2020, in the first weeks of lockdown in Italy, help requests and first aid access were significantly decreased. Not only in hospital, but also in anti-violence center and the national headphone lines. However, thanks to the strength of our network activities and the communication, it was possible to establish the change to the ask for help despite the pandemic. And then, of April 2020, both the first aid unit and the local authorization had been back in full operation. The key factors was the steady and the resilient network of Rose Code, which work in synergy with all the local authorities and anti-violence center to quickly reply and many requests of help from the victim of violence. The core of the resilience was the strength of our well-established and dynamic team. The greatest ally of violence is the loneliness. Loneliness of the victim, but also, very often, of the operator, doctor, policewoman, nurse, who must give answer to them and face a hateful, terrible crime against humanity, and only working all together, authorities and institutions. This can be done. Thanks for the being here. Onward together. And now, the video for you. Forse le luci. Vai.
In 2009, the ASL of Grosseto, today known as ASL Toscana Sud-Est, founded, together with the Public Prosecutor's Office, the ASL Rose Code Task Force to determine ways to combat gender violence and hate crimes. A highly specialised interinstitutional team able to intervene immediately and effectively in cases of violence. The task force operates according to shared intervention procedures, Rose Code and the Rose Path, which allow to assist victims in real time, to accompany them throughout their recovery and escape from violent patterns, to prosecute criminally relevant conduct, ensuring evidence, and to speed up court proceedings. Since 2012, Rose Code has progressively expanded to include all the other health authorities in Tuscany, becoming a true regional network in 2016. It is only natural, after the first steps, to broaden the vision and continue on the journey by involving other parties committed to fighting gender-based violence, both at a national and international level. As it often happens during long journeys, the Rose Code project has known new and important allies, allowing it to expand its range of operations and constantly increase the network of those involved, starting with the anti-violence centres. Today, the team is involved in several other violence prevention projects, including, since 2018, the Listening Space for Abusive Men, SAM, to support men in their journey of change. In 2021, the Ministry of Health across the Tuscany region entrusted the ASL Toscana Sud-Est of Grosseto Arezzo and Siena with the implementation of a national project, CCM 2021, National Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, to combat gender-based violence. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Rose Code network has been particularly resilient, strengthening the synergy with all bodies and institutions for effective and efficient responses, even in the most difficult moments. This film is specifically dedicated to the more than 25,000 victims that Rose Code encountered during the 12 years of activity of the Tuscany Regional Network. Thanks to all the women and men who daily operate and work in the network.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for that important message of providing the synergy between service providers. We are often focused on justice, we think about the police a lot, but this was truly an excellent insight into the value that health also plays in victims' ability to receive the help they need in the aftermath of crime. So thank you very much for that. Our final speaker today is Sylvana Gafa. She has a background both within the police and the victim support service. She is the head of victim support services and established the victim support agency, the first unit within the Maltese police force, the victim support agency there. She will be speaking about their view on gender-based violence during the pandemic. So welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So I am Inspector Sylvana Gafa. I work with the police, but since last year we have moved our offices to the Victim Support Agency, and we are now part of the Victim Support Agency as well, which is a multidisciplinary team. Before the agency, I used to head the police victim support unit. It was a newly established unit as well because in the police force we felt the need that victims needed more support. So the police victim support within the police force has been very, very fruitful to a lot of to the public in general and to the victims. And we also served as a point of contact for the NGOs and other agencies that provide service for the victims. The Victim Support Malta is one of the NGOs that have been established for years, that has been working with the police for long years. And hopefully with the Victim Support Agency now, it's already a year, we will continue to strengthening the support services to all victims of crime. I am a counsellor as well. I am a police inspector and a counsellor, and I started my studies for the Masters in Counselling primarily because of my previous work with vulnerable victims. I used to investigate sexual offences, human trafficking, domestic violence. So it has always been my passion to work with vulnerable victims, and nowadays with my studies as well, I can focus even more to provide the best service to victims of crime, or at least we try. How did the COVID-19 affect, I'm going to start, how did it affect the police in general? It created a lot of stress on everyone, especially first responding officers who are the police. Especially after the shutdown as well, they had to enforce the police, apart from their normal day-to-day duties, they had to enforce social distancing, stay-at-home mandates, the responsibilities of their work as well. It was a whole lot of stress. No one knew what exactly was their job, how we could help the victims out there. A lot of uncertainty, but throughout the months, we managed to come up with different methods of how we can reach out to the public as well. One of the main duties of the police was that was different than it was before, the fact that a victim could file a police report through the phone, through internet, through an email address. This was never possible before, but after the COVID, this has started to be possible, and it's now much more convenient for a lot of victims to file a police report online rather than going to the police station to file a 3-sentence report. So to the COVID, it has helped us as well to come with innovative ideas of how we can assist victims better. The policing in itself is already mentally draining. The long shifts, as I said, the lack of public support, they always complain about the police. Whatever the justice do, whatever any other entity do, it's always the police fault because you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So it's already mentally draining from that aspect. But mental health problems are at a greater rate rather than the general population when it comes to police in general. I get to meet a lot of police officers. They tend to talk about their stresses, and the COVID obviously did not help. They had inconsistent shift scheduling, higher exposure to traumatic events, PTSD, their own police culture in general. They were a threat for the virus exposure. They had to keep on meeting. Meeting the public who they were tested positive, they still had to go if an emergency occurs. So this had put a lot of strain on the force. As I said, they tried as much as possible to reduce contact with the public, but when it comes to domestic violence cases, for example, and emergency calls, the police had to assist the victims just the same as we used to do before the pandemic. So we noticed that the overall calls have slightly decreased during the pandemic. We had less theft reports, so in that regard, the theft reports were much less during the pandemic, but saw an increase in other offences, especially domestic violence. This increase was recorded in almost every country. I have some statistics, for example, 25% in Argentina, 30% in Cyprus, 50% in Brazil. And we had also the increase. We saw the increase even after the first 3 months. We saw a drastic increase. And after, I have statistics, within the first 10 months, we saw around 124 cases over and above the usual cases we used to have every month. So when we take the whole year in general, in 2020, crime in general decreased by 16% because of the COVID. However, domestic violence reports increased by 24%. So that was very alarming for us. We, as police force, we have also established the gender-based and domestic violence unit. So as previously, a victim who had to report domestic violence, she had to go to any police station. So today she finds this particular officer that has helped her. Tomorrow she finds another one who was less helpful. Nowadays we have a specialized unit in the police force that all crimes of domestic violence are investigated by these specialized officers. They were giving training on how to deal with victims. They have a particular room that is much better to interrogate suspects and interview victims. If they have children with them, we have a special room for children as well to cater for. They have a social worker with them who does risk assessment in every report of domestic violence. And then the police officer will offer her support, and the victim, if she accepts, she will be contacted by the police victim support, who will then can refer to our case officers, through the agency, through Victim Support Malta, and we have a good support system within the police force and as public awareness, so that more victims more victims will be aware of all these services provided. We noticed that because of this pandemic, a lot throughout the world, as I said, a lot of victims did not have a safe route. We have persons that contact us whilst they are at work or whilst they go shopping. And because of the pandemic, this has been limited as well. So it's better for the aggressor. They have total control over their victims. Most of them stopped coming for support, stopped contacting the police. But emergency calls have increased, as I said. So the police had to go there, and the type of crimes were more, let's say, grievous rather than the normal calls that we used to have for a victim to come to the police station. Because if usually a victim would go to a police station to file for a report on psychological harm, through the pandemic we noticed that we had more bodily harm rather than psychological. So why was this? Because as the stress has affected the police themselves, obviously it has affected the general public as well. People were jobless, people were working from home, young kids, and I do have young kids, so I know the feeling, the stress that you have with children. Right now, the fact that I can close the door and go to work, and I say, I can have a bit of me time at work, so it's like a break. When you have small children, the husband is not cooperative, or the parents, both of them have lost the job. So these will put extra burden on a lot of families. So it's one of the main factors that even domestic violence and bodily harm have increased throughout the pandemic. Nowadays we are much better. Things are getting back to normally. More victims are reaching out to us. We can meet victims even at our offices now. They started working. Opportunities are coming out as well. So the situation is better. However, the PTSD on victims, and not just on heterosexual couples. This is I'm not just referring to heterosexual couples, but we had a number of reports as well on same-sex marriages as well. They find it, for one reason or another, they find it much more difficult to report their case to the police. So we are also thinking about the possibility of having an LGBTI representative in the police force as well, so that someone can relate and be more confident to report, because there's a good number of persons out there that are not comfortable, are still not comfortable to report to the police. We have all these services available when we talk in such seminars or on such conferences. We can say that we have a good system. We're small, so we easily know each other. I know Juliana for a long time. I didn't know this character of her, but I'm getting to know her a bit more today after this conference. So, but still, there's a number of persons that are not comfortable with the police. But through such conferences and more awareness, they get to know that, listen, you don't have to go to the police to get support. You don't have to report to have free emotional support. So we need to invest more in these in these services so that more people will be forthcoming to file report and stop the abuse, obviously. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And it's much better than online. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. I keep having to move this up. I don't know. Thank you so much for that insight in the very practical aspects of the police's work. I have 3 small children. I completely understand how the pandemic keeps you in this space. You can never leave. You never have a break. And I can only imagine what it must be like. And, oh, excellent. That doesn't make me feel better. We have 10 minutes for question, and I intend to offer the opportunity to the audience in case you have any questions for our excellent audience. I see Ruben is ready with the microphones. Excellent. Do we have any questions to the speakers this morning? Or I'm going to start picking on random countries. Yeah, you don't get to ask a question. I will ask a question then. I was wondering, in terms of the support needs, did you notice any differences in the support needs of the victims that you came across in your different organizations and agencies? And what were those different needs?
Thank you, Marcia.
The needs of the person that's
The victim. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Marcia.
Se tu hai notato delle differenze negli aiuti delle persone in questo ultimo periodo, cioè che cosa
chiedono?
Sì.
Chiedono, ok. In Italy, ok, is in Italy. In Italia, ad esempio, abbiamo visto che nella prima parte era molto difficile avere... Is it okay?
I just need to write.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. All'inizio le richieste non c'erano perché c'era molta paura del Covid.
So at the very beginning, so I would like to introduce myself, just Marzia from another organization. So I'm trying to help this colleague and for the excellent work that they are doing in Italy. This is not so well known, but Tuscany is one of the most important region for the public health and also for this Rose Code. This is a very important. Project. But regarding the question, in Italy, at the very beginning, the requests were not so many because of the people, the victims. They really feel scared. They have fear. I mean, even just to ask for an help.
Okay. Non potevano essere messe anche le donne in protezione nelle case rifugio per il Covid.
Okay. In Italy, we have also this special institution, so we have special house for the women that request help in case of abuse or, you know. It's very important. But because of the COVID, we didn't use it. I mean, we couldn't use it. So that was another problem.
ma quando c'era molto rischio di ripetizione, rischio di vita,
Okay, but when the risk was very severe, very high, because they risked their own life,
abbiamo immaginato un luogo dove poter trascorrere i 14 giorni di isolamento.
but then they consider, they imagine a special place where they can stay safely, of course, for all the 14 days of isolation that was requested by COVID.
In a sanitary hotel.
Yep.
A doctor.
This is COVID hotel that I think everybody experienced the same things in all over the country, but in Italy we have it, and also they were used for women, or I mean for the victims, but mostly in this case women, unfortunately.
Le richieste sono aumentate.
So the requests grew up because they feel confidence that they knew that they can have an help, a real help.
And 2021.
And in the next year, so 2021,
le richieste aumentavano anche perché molte donne durante il Covid hanno perso il lavoro.
And
Violenza, lavoro.
And another problem was that not many, but a growing number of women lose also their jobs due to the COVID restriction, due to the COVID pandemic. And for this reason, also the request for the shelter, a safe place, increased a lot. So violence plus losing their job.
And it's okay? It's okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn to you two ladies as well. You're not getting away so easy. I was wondering, you were mentioning different support needs for different support delivery methods. Did you find that there was any difference in the type of support needs you could meet with the support methods that were available during the pandemic?
Well, it wasn't about availability. It was about inventing. You know, literally, we had never really done online. I mean, Carl, my colleague, had done this thesis on online therapy, and we used to make fun of him. It's like, bullshit. And then he was proven right, which was a bit annoying. But one thing that Sylvana and I were discussing was one thing that changed was the rise in mental health issues. So it wasn't just victimization and PTSD, it was mood disorders and acute anxiety and acute depression, high suicidal ideation, suicidality. And unfortunately, the resources were closing down, you know. So we had the Mater Dei, our main hospital, the psychiatric ward was closed down. So the access to mental health services was reduced and very limited. So that posed bigger issues for us. I mean, we're very blessed that we have a team of psychiatrists who work with us in their private practice, and they were very accessible. But other than that, it was. I'm just going to pass it on.
Yeah, as she explained, nowadays a lot of victims are asking for online support as well. So we've never heard about this before the pandemic, but nowadays there are a number of people that found it comfortable that they can stay at home if they have small children. They don't have to leave them with someone, and they can still receive support online. So. We have pluses as well, not just because we tend to mention only negative things, but there are some positive things as well after the pandemic. And we also noticed the fact that schools had closed down as well. We had a lot of problems when it comes to children. There were children whose school was their haven. The fact that they have problems at their homes and they can go to school, they have the school counselor, the guidance teacher, the teachers that they are comfortable to talk to. And during the pandemic, all schools closed down, so they had to stay at home. We cannot reach out to them because we couldn't reach out to adults, let alone children. So that was another issue that we had to face ourselves with. in order to be able to help. How can we help these children that we used to follow before at school, but now all schools closed down and the parents would not let them receive support because they are the abusers themselves.
There's a question in the chat, I'm being informed. Will you consider the support of trained dogs to support for vulnerable victims where humans cannot reach when the dog actually can? Is this something any of your services would consider?
I think it's amazing. In fact, there was a flyer downstairs. I think it's amazing. There was a flyer downstairs, and I really put it in my bag. I think there's an NGO here who train animals, who train dogs. That's fucking amazing, no? So it would be great if we could collaborate and bring in NGOs like shelters of animals to see how we can provide that kind of service.
My colleagues are saying yes.
I'm sure victim support would be delighted for this because they're having a couple of projects, I believe. This is Alex's pet project. Hey. I think that's all we have time for actually today. Thank you so much for your attention this morning, and thank you to my wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Our moderator for this session, Bianca Bauer, who is, I got that wrong too, didn't I? Bianca's just letting it slide, yeah. I just call her Bianca. So Bianca leads Pfizering Germany, which is a very strong member of Victim Support Europe. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you very much, dear Scerri. It's perfect. Yeah, I welcome you. I'm very glad, as everybody, as we know, to see you in person. Though we have one member of our panel online. I hope she's there, Suzanne Hoff. Otherwise, I am delighted. Hello, Suzanne. Very nice. I don't know. It's weird. Okay. Hello. So it won't be hard to have the coffee break for our meeting now because it will be very exciting. We have a good panel, and I want to jump right in it because I already heard I will lose all friendships with you if I stand between you and the lunch break. So I will be very on point to stop at 1 p.m. So let's start with Suzanne Hoff, who is joining us online. She's international coordinator from La Strada International, which is an NGO network against human trafficking with currently 25 members of NGOs. And I think it's an NGO that has always a lot of work to do, but in these times, even more, I guess. So I'm very looking forward to your short speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologize for not being there with you today. I had some issues with my flights, but I've been following the event online and I've enjoyed very much the interventions yesterday and today. Just to say a few words on La Strada International, we are indeed a European NGO platform. I'm based in Amsterdam. We have 30 members and we are based in 24 European countries. And our members provide direct support and assistance to victims of trafficking as well as to other vulnerable groups. So in the period 2019 to 2021, we have closely monitored the impact of COVID on victims of human trafficking and those vulnerable for exploitation and abuse. And several of our members also conducted research on the issue. And the same goes also for the current war in Ukraine. This week on Tuesday, we have launched a rapid assessment in cooperation with the Freedom Fund, which we have conducted on the risks of related to human trafficking. And this report can be found on our website, but I will also share it later in the chat. If we look at the experience from COVID, and I heard already many speakers spoke about it this morning, crisis, including the conflicts worldwide. This clearly shows that the instability and the turmoil created fertile grounds for traffickers to see that are seeking to exploit the vulnerability of people. For example, if we look at the war in Syria in the past, we saw a rapid increase and still actually an increase of the number of identified trafficked persons from Syria in countries where they found refuge. And also with the current war in Ukraine, we see that there's a lot of anecdotal information related to the risks and the attempts of potential exploitation, but we already see also clear signs and the first evidence that Ukrainians and other people fleeing from Ukraine are very vulnerable for exploitation and abuse. And we have received the first calls also to support people. With COVID, we saw many migrant workers being stranded in countries of destination without income or housing. And we also saw that many were not able to return to their employment abroad and having just no access to income too. And while we noticed that there were a lot of safety measures in place, also mentioned by some of the speakers before, all over Europe, we saw that migrant workers were even still flown in to fill shortages in labor markets, but in particular also in the agricultural sector and also in other sectors. And they had often to continue without much protection and support, and hence many outbreaks of COVID also were reported among migrant workers. Sex work was also prohibited in many different countries, and then as a result, sex workers also lost their income, but also their housing. We saw the same with domestic workers. Many lost their jobs and automatically also the place they stayed, and also they lost their safety networks. Vulnerability is, of course, also very much created when people are dependent on others for protection and support. For example, those persons that might not be able to leave a country or enter the country, as we saw with COVID. But we also see this often after a disaster or a war, as people do not have the right papers or legal opportunities to leave. We see that now also with Ukraine. There were already a lot of undocumented workers and third country nationals in Ukraine, and many might have stranded in Ukraine. And those who leave might face other challenges, that maybe they can cross the borders, but they might not have the same access to protection and support. We saw that at the moment 5 million people have left Ukraine, and the routes have been quite short. As we all know, people mainly had to cross just one border to seek safety in Poland, Moldova, or Romania, or other neighboring countries. So it's not so much expected that a lot of people have been smuggled this time from Ukraine. However, we know that persons also have left Belarus and Russia, or left from other EU or non-EU countries and returned to Ukraine in order to return again to other countries. And those people, might have more difficulties, not only entering countries, but also accessing protection and support. We saw that the European Union reacted quite quick with the European Temporary Protection Directive, which also allowed Ukrainians legal access, not only to EU countries, but also access to protection, housing, and even access to the labor market, which is very positive. And this, of course, will reduce the risks of human trafficking. However, as mentioned, not everyone might have access to this Temporary Protection Directive, as also people fleeing Ukraine, as I mentioned, did not necessarily have legal residence in Ukraine. There were many third country nationals, also stateless persons. And we already see now 2.5 months after the war started, quite some challenges with the implementation of the Protection Directive. There are people also not registering because they don't know yet where they want to stay. Some people feel that they don't want to register because they want to return as soon as possible. And if they don't register, and they also, is still a lack of information, but if they don't register, then of course they have also not access to protection and support, neither access to the legal access to the labor market, which increases again their vulnerability and exploitation chances. Also, we see a lot of dependency of many Ukrainians on the goodwill of others for their transport, for their housing, to find employment and safety. And we also saw that many volunteers came to the borders. There was transport organized by many people, housing. And while this act of solidarity was very good, this also created a lot of risks because volunteers were not registered, not known, new organizations started which no one knew. People were not vetted, including some people who worked for humanitarian organizations, international organizations, and people could very easily access borders, enter places where refugees were hosted, and offer them all kinds of opportunities, which might be good, but could also include risky offers. For Ukraine, of course, and that is also mentioned already by some of the speakers, we saw also the impact it has, the whole war, on their mental health. We saw the destroying of houses, the infrastructure, including also the mental health structures, which have been even bombarded, hospitals. We saw the killing of people. We heard about rape. This also creates urgent needs for trauma care, and we see that people who leave now already have experienced quite a lot of traumatic experience. And as mentioned already by some people, we didn't see this only in the COVID times. We will also see it now that there are shortages in offering psychosocial therapy, trauma care, and that's urgently needed at this moment. We also see that many people face economic hardship, have limited opportunities, social isolation. A lot of people who flee have never been in some countries they're now staying. They don't speak languages. They might not have good access to the labor markets because of not having the right papers or work experience. And we also see that some people who leave now have already fled before due to the occupation of the Donbass and the Crimea. And also we heard, and that was also mentioned by some speakers already, quite a lot of gender-based violence. Actually, in Ukraine, gender-based violence and other violence was already quite high reported already before the war. Also before the war, during COVID, before COVID, we saw a lot of Ukrainians actually working in Europe. There were seasonal workers, very often people working on temporary contracts. At some time, there were nearly 2 million Ukrainians in Poland before the war, and many of them already faced severe forms of exploitation and abuse. If you look at a country as Finland, for example, the majority of the seasonal workers actually came from Ukraine already before the war. If we look at the vulnerable groups, and I'm conscious of the time, if we look at the vulnerable groups, we saw with the COVID pandemic, in particular, then the migrant communities, the marginalized communities, the undocumented workers who have been very vulnerable. We see that again today. We also see the marginalization and the discrimination. We face issues with people who are chronically ill, disabled people, elderly people. Sometimes also because of that, they cannot leave. We heard also a lot about discrimination against Roma, LGBTQI people. And as we reported earlier, the issues of domestic violence, which increased during COVID times, but we also see the first evidence that this is also increase now. We also heard during COVID the increases of online recruitment, the grooming and the exploitation and the sexual exploitation online. What I would like to say further is that what we also see now with the current war, that there are many children, particularly separated and unaccompanied children. It is estimated that there were nearly 100,000 children in institutional care, in boarding schools, in orphanages in Ukraine, and many of them had to leave also Ukraine and are also facing risks of exploitation and abuse. Also because there are shortages in foster care, community care, etc. If we look at the evidence, in the weeks since the war started in Ukraine, there has already been evidence of human trafficking activity. We have received, as I mentioned, the first request to support potentially trafficked people in countries bordering Ukraine and also in other European countries. Our hotlines receive an increased calls of questions, of people to advise. It's not only people who potentially are trafficked that call us, but also a lot of worried citizens, also people that are missing people, and people who want to report dodgy offers, or people who need any kind of support. We also hear that law enforcement bodies, and maybe we hear more about that later, have already reported a lot of suspicious behavior and also started informal investigations, and also the first formal investigations have started. Rape is also reported to our hotlines, in particular our hotline run by La Strada Ukraine. We have so far heard 16 reports of rapes that were reported directly to us. Organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and a lot of the other Ukrainian organizations have been collecting cases of rape related to the war in Ukraine. Lastly, a few words on the challenges we faced during COVID and now also with the war in Ukraine. While we saw, and some speakers said this already, during COVID, social support services, including the services of our members, continued. Many of the anti-trafficking stakeholders and also trafficked victims themselves, they reported the decreased accessibility of assistance and services. We also reported a lot of significant challenges experienced due to the additional barriers we heard, also in coordination and cooperation with governmental institutions, law enforcement agencies, lack of access to legal support, for example, lack of access to shelter, lack of access to medical support. And the same we now tend to see also with the war in Ukraine, especially in the first days of the war and also the first month, we saw that coordination was lacking and we saw shortages of housing and other facilities. NGOs also reported a lack of financial resources, difficulties in reaching vulnerable groups, and suspicion or postponement of activities, including outreach work. Also the controls by the law enforcement and labor inspectorate stopped, which of course also reached that less people could be reached, less people could be identified, and also less referred to protection and support. And then lastly, we also saw lack of financial resources during COVID, but again now, hence we also very strongly call for much more investment in structural systems, in the referral systems already in place, and much more financial support is needed for all these NGOs who are working on the ground to continue their services and assistance. I leave it here because I hope that there will be some questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Suzanne. I think it's very important now under the impression of the Ukrainian war, we tend to forget all the other human catastrophes and all the refugees, for example, from Syria. And it's good you pointed this out, the increasing challenges. And I also thought about, when you were talking about the registration, the point that access was lacking or people weren't registered. We had this picture in mind in Germany with a very ambivalent feeling when all the refugees, the first refugees from Ukraine, came to Berlin main station, and we had a lot of people helping them, keeping up signs, I have room for 2 or 3 people. And on the one side, it's very nice because it's a sign of humanity, but on the other side, nobody was registering who was coming in, who are the people with the signs holding up, and I guess so there is a lot more of work coming up also in our own countries for organizations. So thank you, and now I'm happy to introduce to you Samantha Pace-Gazan. She's Commissioner for the Rights in Person with Disabilities, another very vulnerable group, and this organization set up priorities for the next years, mainly for the protection and promotion of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But I think, like for all of us, the pandemic was something that came in the middle of all your strategy and planning, so we're very curious to hear about your story. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First, I would like to introduce the work that we do as a commission. So, primarily, we promote the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability, and we're also monitoring those rights. And we work with different stakeholders to push forward, again, the rights of persons with disability. But in the process, we identify and are presented with challenges that people face on a day-to-day basis. So we have a team for investigations. We do a lot of other work, but I'm sticking to the ones which are more relevant for today's discussion. So we have people who come forward with us with complaints about their rights being breached. And we also do research. When it comes to investigations, we are mainly focused on all the articles of the convention, but mostly we receive complaints mostly about accessibility, so physical accessibility. But when it came to COVID, we saw a decrease in those complaints and saw an increase in other areas, mostly when it came to education, because education shifted online, and a number of persons with disability, especially those with sensory disabilities or intellectual impairments, couldn't follow their classes. So one of the issues that we are also facing now is the gap. So there was already a learning gap between non-disabled children and children with disability. And this has grown even further during the pandemic. Employment as well, we had a number of issues when it came to employment because employers needed to adjust, again, shifting online, and that there were a number of challenges. Moving forward to now as well, when it comes to employment, I find that in some situations, the person with disability is anxious to go back to work because we have been identified as the vulnerable group, and we've gone back to the medical model in this aspect, where I don't know how aware you are of the medical and social models, so I'll brief you. Basically, there are these two models when it comes to disability, and the medical model is focused on the impairment of the individual, the condition. So if you have a mental health condition, or if you have an intellectual impairment, or whether you're blind or deaf, these are the medical issue, which is focused on the person. Whereas the social model identifies that there is the impairment, but there are also social barriers that hinder the person from accessing their rights. And most of the challenges come from a society that is designed not based on universal principles, which makes services and anything we access accessible for all, but which hinders the participation of persons with disability in our society. So going back to the challenges, I wanted to highlight the different realities that different impairment groups experience. So when it comes to physical impairment, as I've mentioned, we saw a decrease in physical inaccessibility reports. And that is because many people were limited to staying in their houses. But there were also other challenges. So there was a reduction in services because a number of services closed down and weren't considered as priority. So while hospital and medical services were still considered as important and essential, these services were not being provided, at least in Malta, let's say. And therapies, for example, were not being provided. And when I speak of therapies, it could be psychotherapy, it could be physiotherapy, but also other kind of therapies where, like occupational therapy and speech therapy, where people actually progressed and developed in these therapies. So again, there is, people are being left behind in this sense. And when it comes to sensory impairments as well, we identified that a number of visually impaired people had difficulties when it came to simply going shopping, for example. In the chaotic period in the beginning where everyone was doing their shopping and getting things, it was challenging for a person with a visual impairment to actually go in a shop. And because we were scared of touching things and I mean, a visually impaired person could not be touching things to feel what product they are buying. And they wouldn't know, for example, if they're on the bus, they wouldn't know the proximity of another person, for instance. While they would try to respect that distance, you never know if the other person is doing the same. When it came to hearing impairments, people who are deaf, we were all wearing masks. And masks were, I think, the biggest challenge for this cohort, because a lot of people rely not on sign language or on other forms of communication, but on lip reading. And obviously, you couldn't read lips. But there was also another issue when it came to dissemination of information. So while the mainstream society was being we were constantly updated on a day-to-day basis about the number of cases, about what to do, what not to do, and sign language was not provided. So one of the things that the Commission worked on at the time was to actually push for sign language interpretation during COVID press conferences. This was considered a national issue, and obviously the deaf community should have access to listening to these conversations. Eventually, we realized that while there were the daily pre-prepared conferences, there was sign language interpretation. Eventually, we were finding that the more immediate press conferences were not being provided with sign language interpretation, and that was another issue. I didn't forget, obviously, people with intellectual and mental health impairments and disabilities. This is a very particular group, one which I feel that even us are not reaching enough. But when it came to COVID, obviously the information was not accessible in the sense that, we had the superintendent for public health, who is a very good professional, but she is also a medical professional. And I don't know how familiar you are with medical professionals, but they tend to speak in very challenging language, which sometimes we don't even understand. And that was difficult in that sense. But also the anxiety levels increased during this period, and people with intellectual disability were presented with this new reality where they had to be confined in their houses, where they had to access their education through online methods. And there were different realities. And not everyone understood what was actually going on. And also, I find that people who understood, even to this day, the anxiety levels within those people. I have a sister who has Down syndrome, so I experience that on a day-to-day basis. And while she was very social and interactive before COVID, even today she is limiting herself from going out, even when we present her with opportunities to do so because of COVID. And I think that the impact will continue to carry on. One thing which I'm very concerned about is the concept of vulnerability, because we have, again, gone back to this medical model, to putting people with disability, presenting people with disability as being vulnerable, whereas before we were trying to promote, and we are still trying to promote, people with disability as being empowered, as being able to make their own decisions, but that we've reverted back to being dependent quite a lot. And there are people who are dependent on services. So we have residential services here, we have day center services here, again, services which closed. But also within residential services, we have seen an increase in the institutionalization of such services because of the rigid regulations that people had to abide by during the pandemic. So these are all issues that we came across during this process. Another aspect which I feel is very important to discuss here in this context is the intersectionality. So people with disability do not live in a vacuum. We live in a society, so we can also be victims of domestic violence. We can also be observers of domestic violence in situations where one of our parents is being abusive. And a lot of persons with disability do not have access to these services. So we tend to focus services of, let's say, domestic violence or services of crime on specific groups, but persons with disability tend to be left behind. And I was speaking with Sylvana earlier, the inspector, and she also, I asked about the rate of reports when it came to people with disability for these services. And she told me we didn't have any or much. And it isn't because maybe the services are accessible, but it's very difficult to reach these groups. So if you have a person with an intellectual disability who is living in the household with their parents, and their parents are being abusive, for example, one scenario which comes to mind is when you have persons who, because of the confinement and because of the difference in routine, are acting out, the parents can actually be more aggressive towards them. And again, let's not forget that the intolerance of everyone in general was quite higher, the intolerance. So yes, there are issues. I think we need to promote these kind of services, the services that you are providing, but in a way that reaches everyone. And to reach everyone, sometimes you have to go out of your comfort zone, and you have to think of easy-to-read formats, of specifically targeting a specific group, thinking and collaborating with different organizations who have access to these target groups. I was also speaking to Victim Support Agency, and I really look forward to having this discussion to further strengthen the services and the outreach to persons with disability within at least Malta. But I hope I can give you this message to also think outside your box and do the same and reach out to persons who work, to organizations that work in this sector in your respective countries, and go beyond what you are, the good work that you are already doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and for the insight. And I think for us, all of us, it's very important to work on the accessibility. I have the small example from our organization. We built up a help system for deaf people, which is only a small group of all the person you are representing. And it's not just translating and offering a service, it's really changing the accessibility of our help. It's like learning what their needs are that are quite different than we know. So I think that's something of training of our organization and building up. And also I like very much here pointing out the empowerment of the people and not the dependence on institutions, but the right to get help and access to help. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. Thank you very much. Now I have the interesting role to call myself on the floor. I will talk to you about bias and hate crime victimization, so that's convenient, I'm already here. As Julianne already explained, the first days of the pandemic, also VSE was very much in panic mode to organize ourselves, but the organization, the only difference, we didn't chase for bolognese sauce, but for toilet paper. But fortunately, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going into that. After the first week that we arranged to realize the lockdown and realizing that our whole help system, which is built for the personal contact, like the most, I think you are, needs to be completely changed into IT system-based work. We had to change our whole administrative service, organizing IT equipment, home office, all things that VSE didn't used to do before COVID. So it was a huge challenge, also realizing that the help was very much needed. So it took us 2 weeks to be able to offer our normal services in contactless help via our local branches who communicated only by email, phone, IT, with app and stuff. The first thing after these 2 weeks where we were just focusing on reorganizing our whole help structure was pretty obvious that we were approached from media, from everybody. You have to take care about the domestic violence. This will increase. And I was wondering, because all we knew from domestic violence was, of course, these are the criteria that support the increase of domestic violence. But I was wondering, do people really reach out for help if the perpetrator is at home, if they are all living together? As far as we knew, normally it comes with a delay, the searching for help, because everybody in this situation maybe is not free to look for help. So we were politically talking a lot about domestic violence, but have very different figures in Germany about a decline of number and increasing. It's not one picture I can bring. But what we can bring from our organization, our online service, our helpline, our telephone line, was really indeed exploding with requests because of domestic violence. So we had an increase of more than 20% from 2019 to 2020, and another additional 10% in the next year. So on our digital tools, we had this increase of women looking for support, looking for shelter. As we heard today, the giving support was not easy because shelters, the accessibility was very stressful. Shelters, we have not enough places in normal times. We don't have enough space in women's shelter. Imagine even in Corona pandemic where they had all those healthy and safety regulations. So we didn't have space for that. So we were trying and doing in several regions projects with hotels who were empty due to the lockdown. So we had this projects that there were whole hotels offering shelter for women in need. We also were launching a campaign against or for looking for help if domestic abuse, domestic violence is the matter. With the headline "Silence Make You Vulnerable," of course, we projected all our advertisement, all our info into the internet, into social media. And this was a very big campaign. A lot of other institutions joined this, Make Yourself Loud. We had an influencer who used this and who spread the campaign. So the number we are having is also with the increase of domestic violence it's a fact. I don't know if it's also because there was a lot of talking about. In Germany, we have this very wrong perception that violence against women is not a real German problem. We have now the femicide topic. Weißer Ring stressed out the whole femicide people where every 3 days in Germany a woman is killed in context of domestic violence. And we have this very strange understanding that it's nothing of a specific problem in Germany. So maybe this pandemic, as horrible it was, helped at least to make this topic public, to make realize we have this huge problem in Germany, and to reach out for help to make it accessible for those in need. So we have 80%, as far as we know, women being victims of domestic violence and about 20 who are men. So this is also to be focused on. This is one matter or one crime that was a very, very main topic during the Corona pandemic for us. Then the general sexual abuse, sexual harassment was steadily increasing, but another crime field which puts in which is really frightening in a scary scale is the politically motivated hate crime. It's a bit, afterwards we were speaking about, it's of course, I'm not going to talk about cybercrime in general, but just the whole pandemic. We had this problem before that we had political motivated crime. We have the problem of hate speech in the net. We have the problem of, especially from the right wing, from people from the right who are creating death lists in the internet where people are standing with name and address and everything. We have politicians from the right wing who are addressing person. We have people killed afterwards because some users in the internet felt legitimate to kill them because they felt they were the majority. So we had this bubble already and the problem, and due to the pandemic, it increased in an incredible amount. And I just got the figure this week from our German Federal Office of Criminal Investigation. They just went out with their numbers this week, and they have the significant increase by over 25% of all politically motivated hate crime on representatives of democracy like politicians, journalists, lawyers, NGOs. And I remember very much, Frida, you had in one conference, I don't know, several years ago, then in Sweden they had this special regulation if it comes to politically motivated hate crime. And now we are there in Germany that we must realize that we have it's democracy at stake, because we, as VSE Ring, help a lot of journalists, we help politicians and local politicians. It's not only the minister of the Federal Republic, but also little local politicians who have to stop to work because they are in threat and their families are threats. And the numbers we hear now from the BKA is just nothing, because we also know that this special crime is not, they don't make a report. Victims don't report this kind of crime because they want their peace. If they get out of the situation, we also change their names, we help them with moving, we help them transferring the family into different regions. And so this is something which Petra and I were discussing also in the board, which makes us really concerned, because it's way more dangerous than the main broad variety in Germany thinks we are. Most of people, when we talk about it in some forum, they think, well, that's something of some nerds in some IT bubble, and they are playing Warcraft and hating each other, and they don't realize that it's a general problem of our society. And the numbers we got from the Criminal Investigation Office also showed that it swifts to the middle of the society, hate crime. We had this problem from the right wing, but now it's increasingly not due to a specific political group, but it's this general corona pandemic people who were demonstrating against the regulations, the protesters, and they mingle with people from the medicine, with people from the right wing, and it's way more difficult, of course, to handle this group because it gets into the middle of the society. So that's just something we really focus on, and that is something VSE Ring works in an extremely intense way, because we see we see our democracy in danger. It's not less than this, and so we build up units. The good thing is that you can prove. We have also studies. You can prove if you, for example, practice counter speech. If you go into the net, which is a horrible job to do, but if you go the whole day into the net and you have the practice counter speech, those voices silence a bit, and it has a positive effect. So you can make change. But I think the very important thing is that we realize how far we already have gone in our country, and how much work we need to do there. So that's something VSE Ring is putting the focus on very much last year, this year, and the pandemic just increased the whole thing. And we have in between. We used to have the main victims coming to us came from violence against the, sexual abuse, sexual violence, and now we have 1/3 coming victims from hate crime already, which is huge. It's unbelievably amount of people in relation to the other. So this is maybe a very short insight of what was taking us in strength during the COVID pandemic, without getting into the next insight, because of course the whole topic is cybercrime, which if people are not outside, they focus even more on the internet. And so I guess we will hear very interesting figures from the next panelist, Sergeant Matthew, from the cybercrime unit from the Malta police force. I couldn't Google you personally because we didn't know who personally came, but at least I found out that the unit was built in 2003 and was made up, of course, from police officers who are trained in crimes taking place in the internet. Logic, sounds logical. And you have the other duty of crime prevention. And interesting what I found out, you manage a child abuse internet filter, which prevents Maltese internet users from accessing websites taking child pornography. That's very interesting.
Part of the team actually who oversees child abuse-related cases.
So I'm looking personally very much forward, because this is another number. We had a terrific increase during the pandemic. If you see the numbers, we have an unbelievable increase in pornography and child abuse in the internet. So we are very interesting. I guess it will be the same everywhere. So the floor is yours, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, first and foremost. So as you mentioned, the pandemic didn't give us exactly roses. Unfortunately, they shifted our entire lives on the internet. And because of this, we encountered several difficulties. The difficulties that were encountered were that there were several people of various age groups that they didn't know how to use exactly the internet and how to be safe. Criminals, unfortunately, took advantage of this situation, and they tried to take advantage of the situation. Unfortunately, we saw rises in cases, especially when it came to fraud cases, like, for example, scams. Since everyone shifted their entire life on the internet, they had the tendency to buy everything online. So if there was, for example, a great deal to get clothes, games, even books or groceries, everyone tried to take it. And unfortunately, the perpetrators knew about this, and they created fake websites, for example, to induce people to buy from those particular websites, thus achieving what they desired. As mentioned earlier also, there were also increases in reports when it came to unauthorized access, hate crimes also, since everyone were cozy at home, they felt like they can type everything on the internet. And if they saw something that they didn't like, they decided to post it, not having in mind that when they post something, they might actually hurt a physical person, because they were literally thinking that they were virtual, because they were not seeing the person in front of them. As a unit, when we were seeing that there were some increase in these types of crimes, we tried to go a little bit proactive. So we create campaigns, online campaigns, to try and educate the people on how to stay safe on the internet, what type of posts they can post, upload, what type of photos, because we also encountered difficulties that there were certain people that decided to share certain indecent material of themselves. Since they were not physically getting together with people, for some reason they decided to share indecent materials just to keep up the spark for themselves. And we had cases also when it came to child abuse, especially, that there was like a little bit of a demand, what you can say, is that since everyone was at home and everyone shifted online, they had to gather the material from somewhere. So yes, we catered for that by implementing the filter and several countermeasures to try and mitigate and locate victims if the necessary need be. Of course, when it comes to policing the internet, we cannot police it like 100%, as we do not have a 100% of visibility of the internet. Everyone knows that the internet is very vast. So I believe that with the help of the people, we can have a 100% visibility of the internet, and we can be able to police the internet if people think about the stuff they are going to post, think what likes they make, what the internet is good for, and especially they must think that on the other end of a computer, there's not a virtual person, but a human being that with even a simplest word, we can hear that particular person. What we encountered also was that although we had increase in crimes, there were certain crimes that were not being reported because the public was not made aware that we had an online police reporting system, the OPRES, that was there to facilitate their every need. In the past, And even nowadays, when you want to lodge a report, you had to go physically to a police station. Of course, due to this pandemic, we had to go stay inside. So if we had an issue and we needed to report that particular issue, we didn't know what to do and what not. There were also several people, unfortunately, who, security-wise, they lagged on how to stay safe on the internet, especially how to use their email address, even when it comes to the young children, since their entire world was shifted online and they started playing games more often. They started to carry out their homework, even attend lectures online due to softwares provided. They tended to stay a little bit at ease, but they didn't have the necessary security. As part of the campaign, of course, we tried to create awareness on how to stay safe on the internet. From my end, I think that's all. So I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Perfect timekeeper. So that's very good. Thank you very much. I think this is a very important point, the education, the awareness, prevention, but also the technical equipment for the police to be able to get after this amount. So we have the good opportunity to have time for questions. So first of all, I would like to ask you if you have questions for the panelists, also for Suzanne online. So please, if you have any questions, you have the possibility now. You have a question? Do I see it correct? Yeah, there is a question in the back. I think we need the micro because of the internet community, right? And for me too, maybe.
Thanks. Thank you. Another brilliant panel. Thank you. I've got a question for Bianca that was also a question I had for Code Rose earlier. What is it possible to say what proportion of hate crime, people who've experienced hate crime you're dealing with, that's about racist hate crime or transphobic and homophobic? Particularly race and faith, whether you've got that separately and whether you've got gender and sexuality separately. Do either organisations have those stats?
That's a very interesting question because we normally don't, our statistics till now, we didn't do this on purpose because media always wants to know who are the victims, who are the perpetrators, and we always focused on not raising the debate also with the looking at the perpetrators of the race. But of course, regarding hate crime, we have our intern not so perfect statistic. So at the moment, it's like you can say it's against, the focus is on people who care about those topics. It's not necessarily the person of a race you want to discriminate. We have a high, in one sector we have a high number, which is violence against Jewish people, which is a very difficult topic because it's from different, also migrants and Germans and a mixture of the perpetrators. I mean, it's a very complex topic. We have it would be good for an own session to really go in depth why. But this is one group of discriminated group. But if we are talking about hate crime in general, I can say it's against the people taken care of. So, or being, but it's in general. We have, for example, politicians who the person the family that got our help. He was Walter Lübcke. He was just saying 2015 when there came the refugees from Syria. He was a politician from the CDU, which is a conservative party. So he was standing there and saying we need to be an open country, and who doesn't understand this. Symptoms. He said something like he can go, but we are an open country for people who are in need. And so at the end of the story, he was killed because of this sentence, because another politician, it was a woman from the right party, she posted this sentence like over 2 years over and over again, and there was this whole shitstorm in the internet, and at the end there was this one person who was activated thinking he was doing this for the majority of people, because in his bubble everybody was thinking that this person should have been killed. Another example, now in the corona pandemic, we were at it was Shell station, for petrol station, and there was a young man, 21 years old. He was talking to a man coming in without mask, please to wear the mask. This man got out, drove home, got a gun, came back and shot this man. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about hate crime. We have all those politicians, local politicians. They are, for example, engaging in NGOs or these local organizations for refugees or for asylum or for LGBT, for some group, and just the engagement is enough. And the figure, I think, this is what we know about. I think the person is, if you are from a migrant background or lesbian or homo something, you won't less report. I think this is numbers we even don't have any kind of idea, because I think they don't even come to any institution to ask for help, or to really specific little institution. So this is only a bit more light in this kind of, I hope it was, yeah, okay. There is a question in the back, and then there, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for the panel. In your respective jurisdictions, which groups are included under the umbrella of hate crime, and specifically are the groups who have different disabilities included in your definition of hate crime?
From my point of view, hate crime is very open-minded. It's like, so we don't have this a restriction. It's all the victims. You mean from the amount, or you mean from the, no, from a, no, we don't have this. As soon as somebody, as soon as a person is being attacked because of his or her position, political or freedom of speech, or being a group of a minority or felt minority, as soon as the attack goes to this person out of this motivation, if the motivation is to harass a person because of a difference of your own, so we figure this on our statistic on hate crime, as soon as you have this, yeah. As soon as you have a motivation to hurt or to harm or to kill this person because of having different opportunities or a different than your own group. So we are very general in our definition. I think there is, yeah, and then I see.
I have a very related question to what you raised previously about the underreported crimes. And I think it's also very much related to what Samantha very rightfully pointed, that actually groups that let's say are marginalized, stigmatized, or even criminalized, and who traditionally have like distrust to the formal, to authorities, need some kind of like bridge in between access to justice, access to reporting, and to have some institution or organization maybe that is not primarily working on victims of crime, that will help them to bridge the gap in between, like the distrust. And the question for you is, because my organization is the European Sex Workers' Rights Alliance, and we are working with sex workers, and my agenda is mainly sex workers' access to justice. And they exactly belong into the group who are victims of hate crime, not only because of their gender, but because of they being sex workers. And we call it like war phobia, which is against them. And the problem is that since in many countries they are criminalized, they have huge distrust to authorities. And our message is that like organizations working in victim support should more ally with organizations like sex workers unions, but also organizations that are working and supporting homeless people, people using drugs, people working with LGBTQI communities, who are in touch with these communities who do not primarily work on victims of crimes or do not support victims of crime, but have insight into the communities. And my question is, if you have this kind of strategies, not only as an NGO, but maybe also of police, because what you said very much resonates, because during the COVID-19 crisis, many sex workers turned to internet to provide for a living. And currently, they know very well the dynamics of the online sex market. And they could be a great allies in identifying, let's say, child sexual exploitation, but also human trafficking online. But the question is whether there are strategies how to reach out those communities that traditionally do not report, because there is a kind of gap in between or lack of trust.
Thank you for your question. I think it's good for the whole panel. I just start with 2 sentences and give it to you. From our point of view, indeed, as you say, you need to have a bridge, and you need to have often the services are all very specific on this one group, or you have a generic who needs a bridge, somebody maybe even out of this group as communicator to raise the awareness for both sides. So this is a very important thing to get the accessibility, because as a matter of fact, I think it's in every country that they nearly have no access, they don't report because of all the reasons you said. But I would like to give it to the panel, because I think maybe first Suzanne and then you two to give from your point of specific view. You could, Suzanne, you want to?
Yeah, yes, for sure. And thanks, Irena, for the question. No, I think in general we have a strategy. Actually, we are members of ESWA, because we do see definitely that sex workers have a good outreach, know what's happening in the sex industry, and can help to identify people who we do have the strategy. At the same time, we also align with domestic workers organizations and others. So we think it's very important. We also very much understand her issue of the lack of safe reporting. I mean, there was limited time, but I had definitely one of the recommendations from me would be much more focus on safe reporting, complaint mechanisms to be in place, not only during COVID and now with the war in Ukraine, but in general for workers in whatever sectors. But in particular, we see that indeed also with sex workers, that a lot of people are afraid to complain, to report. There are some good practices, but the fact is that people who are not documented or who are in work which is not legalized, or who, as Irena said, face to be criminalized, for many of them, there's not really a safe way to report crime. And as a result, a lot of the crimes are therefore not stopped. So if people cannot safely report crime, but they face detention, deportation, then we will also not see the actual what's happening on the ground. And we need actually people in the field to report those crimes in order to address them.
Thank you, Suzanne. You want to give a statement, Samantha, on this?
I don't know much about sex work and the industry, to be honest, but there are persons with disability who are also sex workers, but there are also support workers who work with people with disability, and this is why I don't like the concept of vulnerability being related to disability, because having a disability doesn't necessarily make you a victim, and some persons with disability are actually perpetrators, and they abuse their support workers. So I agree that there needs to be this kind of strategy. There's also another element, which is a huge discussion whether persons with disability should have access to sex workers, for example. There was quite a discussion here in Malta as well. But again, there's this element of intersectionality, and I agree that there needs to. I really don't like having boxes, and because people are intersectional, you know, and my identity is that of a person with disability. I'm a woman, I'm a young person as well, so all these factors actually factor in the identity of the person. And being a sex worker with a disability, for example, needs to be taken into consideration when we're working on such strategies. So, that's my 2 cents.
Sergeant Matthew, you have an insight, a police insight. You must have an opinion.
Well, first and foremost, I believe we have to make a distinction in this case about child sexual exploitation and people who offers that type of service against payment. When it comes to having children, so child sexual exploitation, we all know that they are doing it against their will. So unfortunately, I don't think that people who offer certain services are going to help, especially the police, when it comes to victim identification. And there are also crimes that are related with inducing people, for example, to take off their clothes, for instance, just for the purpose to blackmail them. So there's a little bit of justification in this case that we need to be aware. But there are means and ways that if there are people who offer services and feel either discriminated or in the case that there are crimes reported against them, there are means and ways, especially with the Malta Police Force, that they can file their report and assist us with the investigation. If there is a need for certain investigations to be carried out.
So do I understand you already have this connection where you have specific person?
Not a specific person per se, but there are means and ways. Like for example, we have the Facebook Messenger of the Malta Police Force. We have the online police crime system, the OPRES, and we also have people who can send us an email, full anonymous of course, and report that particular crime that they wish for them to be reported.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think it's generally very much a topic about awareness and about the society, how to deal with this. So this is what I said before about domestic violence. The only good thing about this in the pandemic, at least in our country, is that we are talking about it. I mean, it's the first time, and it's awkward that we are in 2022 and we are talking like the first time, okay, we have a problem, we might also in our country have to look into it. And so I can imagine the victims, if you have this society not seeing them, it's even more difficult to get help. Imagine maybe some groups that are already on the border, so it's awareness a lot, I think. You were waiting for your question, please.
I was preparing, actually. First and foremost, thanks, because it is a great opportunity to be hosting you in Malta, also alongside the victim support Malta, and the agency that they are doing a great job in Malta. I would like to ask a question in regards of cybercrime, etc. But I wrote it down because I couldn't remember it. In regards of the team tackling online hate crime, cybercrime. How is the team equipped, trained, to deal with the perpetrators that are trying to re-victimize the victim through the system? Are they able to identify that perpetrator is using the system to waste time, money, do her the dirty, shift focus, blame the victim, do the cybercrime investigate perpetrator posing as victim, past history, so that they can identify the intention of re-victimization towards the victim? And are the police and the judiciary system, court, working together so that they identify such perpetrators, try to use the system to re-victimize the victim? Do the report of such perpetrator proceed in court, even though they have clear evidence that the perpetrators has the only intention to re-victimize the victim, because everything has shifted, and also the abuse has shifted, that from face-to-face to online, and coming from the area of working directly with victims, most of our victims and survivors were totally abused online, especially when there is child access, For example, he has to pick up at a time. The mother has to go to work at that time. They don't pick up. She needs to go to report. We have all these playouts to exhaust and re-victimize the victim and abuse by proxy, by the court, by the police. They are using everything, anything possible to, continue abusing by proxy. So, in regards of the question, so that I have asked.
Well, that's a very complex question.
Yes.
I'm very glad we are 4 people to be able to answer. As far as I think a main part of your question is regarding how do the people investigating equipped? How are they equipped? I mean, from our country, I know it's a sheer disaster to the equipment they need and the personal time you need for those kind of investigation is huge. The amount of data. Then we have from the legal framework a lot of topics regarding data protection, which is very high. And the possibility of the police for the investigation, which are confronting. I think so. This is maybe what you could take over from the point of helping the victim. Of course, I guess one main, very important thing for me is a lot of cybercrime is real, also analogen crime, face-to-face crime, because we have all those other about, it's cyber mobbing, cyber stalking, but at the end of the story, there will be a physical victim with physical stalking, physical mobbing, or hurting, killing. So this is very important to say. It's not just in the bubble internet. You go out and you have nothing to do with it anymore, but it's a whole thing. So it's shifted, the start shifts, and it makes it way more complex, but and as far as regarding the re-traumatization in process, in the law, in front of court, that's something, for example, we as victim organization try to cover for the victim, to go with the victim to court, to explain what's happened, to give help and assistance, of course also to urge the institutions to be trained in victim-friendly process. We have from the regulation, at least in our country, the law is pretty good, but often in the practical way, it's not being used. Like video, you could make the video statement of victims. We have the law, we have the right, but it's not used because nobody wants, it's too complicated, and we prefer to do it the old way. So this is a lot of training also. But I would like to give the floor to Matthew.
So, with regards to your first question, as a cybercrime unit, a definition per se of cybercrime, we cannot find one because the internet is so vast, and there are lots of crimes that intersect each other in this case. And when it comes to hate speech and people being re-victimized, we have to keep in mind that once we post something on the internet, we lose 100% control of what we post. So even if we decide to remove it, like for example, 5 seconds later, someone can simply take a screenshot and re-upload it when they want. So when it comes to re-victimization, in this case, people might end up, yes, being re-victimized because those particular posts might resurface in the future. What the best practice that one can do, of course, first and foremost, not to upload such things. And if there are things that they feel uncomfortable with on any particular platform, they can report directly with their abuse team to remove such content. Unfortunately, we are not able, not as a police, but in general, we are not able to remove 100% of the content that is being uploaded on the internet. Because the internet, of course, is so vast that it makes it a little bit difficult to keep track of who has what and when it can be uploaded in the future. Crimes that involves hate speech are being catered by another unit, the Vice Squad, and they enlist our technical assistance so that we can determine the location of the perpetrator, the content that is being posted or uploaded, and the nature in this case, of the particular crime. Once we carry out the technical inquiries from our end, for example, if it's happening on Facebook, we preserve the content, we try and see the perpetrator who has uploaded that particular post or comment, we communicate with Facebook, and we try to get information that can lead us to the particular perpetrator. Once the perpetrator is known, he or she is then prosecuted to court, and of course, we leave it then to the court to issue the particular sentences, or in this case, the judgment related with that particular case. Yes.
Thank you, very clear. So if you have this scenario and there is more other criminal records in regards, for example, of domestic violence, and the victim is trying to show her perpetrator with his post, so that, for example, he also filed a police report against her that he is also a victim. So there is this scenario, two victims, one posing as a victim and the other one, she's the victim, for example, and you have these reports. Going up on the internet now, he's writing, for example, some stuff towards her, but he's not naming her. But they have friends in common, and now he's creating a cohort of people who is cheering for this one and the other one cheering for the other one. So in particular cases, for example, how would you use this material that he is posting to support her, for example, with the domestic violence case? Could they be linked, or those are individuals, seen individual? Could the history, the back history, be used in court so that he is not continue wasting the time of the police, of the law, of the court?
Thank you. In that particular case, we have to make a clear distinction in this case about defamation. Unfortunately, defamation was repealed from the criminal code. So if people are feeling that they are being defamed on the internet, they have to seek legal counsel as a civil case in this case. And with regards to previous conviction to be taken back to court or to make lieu on the sentence, it's up to the prosecutor in this case to present the criminal history or previous sentences that the perpetrator was being judged previously on. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you very much. I would like maybe if there is one question, we take that before we make the final countdown with the final round.
Yes, hello, I'm Leena Kaisabri from Victim Support Finland. I think I have a question to Susan concerning the Ukrainian refugees that we all are receiving in our countries. I would be interested to hearing a little bit about your thoughts and ideas that how can we reach out to these people who have come to our countries as refugees and are vulnerable. And we know that the crime they are countering, it's not only trafficking and work exploitation, it's all kinds of crimes. And of course, we're printing our leaflets in Ukrainian, and we're reaching out to the refugee centers and trying to reach out to the Ukrainian organizations and this kind of. But if you have some ideas, what we could do more to reach out to these possible crime victims. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. We all need help with. Susan.
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, of course, it's difficult. I must say that a lot of the information we receive, and probably the same for you, is of course through the hotlines and through the direct work with victims, also because they know others maybe. But I see several possibilities. First of all, of course, there's a lot of technical tools, and we also have been contacted, and I know that many of our members already start to use also like technical tools to search themselves also online. What I think in particular is important to also to do reach online. There have been a lot of groups created after the war of Ukraine started, because of course a lot of people were offering housing, transport, created, for example, in Amsterdam, we have groups that saying, help Ukrainians, if you want to join this group and you have maybe offers for housing, you can join. And so that's next to the official groups that have been created by organizations or governments. We also see a lot of informal groups. What a lot of our members are already doing is registering themselves also with those groups, and then also checking what's happening online, and in case there are questions, to check also what information is provided and if that information is correct, and sometimes also to correct information. Also, our member Fair Work in the Netherlands is doing a lot of online groups, so the online work as well. So they also use cultural mediators, people who speak Ukrainian or Russian, to also be online. They do the same for other countries, but now related to the war, that's also very important, that you have people make use of maybe volunteers or other people that speak Ukrainian or Russian to also inform you. There have been, of course, a lot of volunteer organizations in different countries. So I think it's also very important now, as was suggested already earlier, but to get in contact with other organizations. We see in a lot of countries there are now national action groups and task forces, so people share information, and that will also help the referral. I think it's also important, the Red Cross, for example, at the borders was not naming the numbers of the anti-trafficking hotlines, but in particular 112 numbers and other hotline numbers. So I think it's also important that all the different hotline numbers know your number and refer to you. And so you can also get it through other organizations in the country. So also inform them that they should reach out to you and that they should refer, because I'm actually doubting how many 112 persons running those hotlines are actually trained on the different hotlines and possibilities to get information in the different countries. I know that in Finland there's also then the seasonal workers hotline now starting, as I heard. So I think that's another possibility, of course, to get much more information. But I would definitely say, yeah, and of course, where possible, be also in contact with the refugee organizations, with the other organizations, that they also get your information and that they know that they can refer people. We do see, because we were also strongly promoting our numbers, and a lot of people with us were promoting our numbers, including the border police in Poland, for example. So we do receive a lot of other calls. That's, of course, puts challenges on capacity, but on the other hand, that's also good because you get a lot of information. So, yeah, people call us also for housing and for access to labor, to the labor market, which of course we cannot help directly with. But if we then refer to others, we also help them indirectly. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So I think information and networking and spreading the word is crucial. It's key. Thank you very much. I would like to close the panel with one last question to each of the panelists, which is indeed a short one, but in two parts. What would you wish for your organization to be better, even able to get even better results? What do you need? What you wish for? And maybe the second part is, what are you positive about so that we have maybe a positive outcome of this session? Is there something in your work that gives you a little light and hope? Would you like to start? Samantha?
So one of the positive things that came out of COVID for persons with disability, especially with physical disabilities, was the online accessibility, because the virtual reality is that museums were opened and music concerts were being online. They could enjoy their right to leisure and entertainment. So that's a positive, right? If I can hope for one thing, is that to be able to have a true picture of realities, because through research, through investigations, you can interview stakeholders, you can try to get hold of the realities and the different scenarios in the families. But I really feel that to know the truth, it's really difficult because everyone has their own perspective and they give their perspective. You can come to a conclusion. But to really know the truth is, I think, one of the biggest challenges in our work. And that obviously people actually abide by and take on the responsibility to actually abide by the UNCRPD convention.
Thank you very much. Dr. Matthew.
From my end, the most satisfaction that I get, especially, and the thing that brings me joy is that when we identify a victim that is related with child exploitation material. So that is, of course, one of the best joys that, at least as a unit, it brings us. Because we can find that victim and remove it from the dangerous environment. What I'd like to see, of course, is maybe a better consideration of what people type on the internet. So maybe we can reduce certain crimes. And we must also keep in mind that whatever we decide to write or post on the internet might not necessarily affect ourselves, but it can affect other people, thus ending up victimizing other people. And as we all know, we cannot truly remove content from the internet. So not necessarily today, but maybe in the future, those things that we upload today might still be re-uploaded on the internet, and we can still re-victimize other people.
Thank you. Susan, your wish and your ray of light for us. Last closing word.
The positive thing, I think it's what was just said. I think it goes for all of us. The online opportunities, definitely the fact that I can still attend now this event, even though I'm not physically with you. I think that really helped. I think it's partly sometimes even also increased some people who could not travel or could not participate. So that was definitely very positive. And as you also raised yourself, I think it's also very positive, not only much more awareness for domestic violence, also much more awareness for human trafficking and exploitation and abuse in general. We saw that with the war in Ukraine. I think the positive thing is we've never seen with a conflict so much solidarity, so much people to act, and also so much attention actually for the risks of human trafficking. So that's very positive. As for the needs, I think speaking on behalf of all our members, I think it's really needed to get financial support also long term. It's very good that now all these international actors, so many people do things for Ukrainians, but of course we should not forget all the other people who are vulnerable, who also flee from other countries. And I think in general, as was raised already, a lot of people supporting refugees are very much under pressure. Also they face indeed, as you mentioned yourself, harassment. People are currently prosecuted even for smuggling practices, even though they're just wanting to help people. So I think there's much more need for civil society and actors to be supported, and also funding. That not all the funding goes now to interim and ad hoc structures, but that funding also goes to long-term hotline supports, long-term shelters, and that we really make use of the shelters and the structures already in place, that we don't invent the wheel again, and that all of us who are in the field, even maybe focusing on slightly different focus groups and target group, strengthen our cooperation. And that's another positive thing to say. I think during the war, we have started to cooperate with a lot of other European networks, and actually we strengthen a lot our cooperation. So I see that as very, very positive.
Thank you very much to my wonderful panel. Thank you for your participation. I hope with this ray of light, lunch is even better. Thanks. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca, and all of our speakers. I think both of our panels this morning have really highlighted how agile and flexible our services are and the response to the challenge of the pandemic. And I suppose even the final session there has really highlighted the ongoing challenges that are faced by not only the pandemic, but also the ongoing conflict and war, both in Ukraine, but also in other areas of the world as well. So I would like to just take this opportunity to bid you all farewell. I need to leave early this afternoon, so I'm not going to be able to be here for the final dinner tonight. As most of you know, I'm due to take up a new position as a new post of Victim of Crime Commissioner Designate in Northern Ireland, which is wonderful for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a really exciting chapter, I hope, for Northern Ireland and for me on a personal level as well, and something that we have, a position we have long called for within Victim Support Northern Ireland. But the sad side is that it does mean that I have to step down early from my term as President of Victim Support Europe. And I hope to always be the person who has the title of the shortest serving President of Victim Support Europe, with the days being counted by Marina diligently. But as I go, I would just like to pay thanks to both Levant and Alex and the whole Victim Support Europe team, as well as our board, the management team, and also the members for their support to me in my role as president, albeit the short 1 year plus that it has been. I'd also like to pay a particular thanks to João Lázaro, who is our former president, for his support and guidance whenever I took on the position. Unfortunately, João, they've left some of the Portuguese contingent have had to leave, but I did want to thank them as well. But I wish you all, both Victim Support Europe and all of our members and friends, every success and luck for the future. I hope to still be able to return in my new role as hopefully an associate member at some stage in the future. So it isn't farewell for good. It's just a change of position. But thank you. So that takes us to lunch, and we are pretty much on time. So if it finishes late, just know that it was all okay when I left, so no pressure to leave. For those of you who are here with us, we will be coming back following lunch to the workshops directly at 2:10. For those of you joining us online, we will be back in the main conference room at 4:10. Can I also just quickly remind you all that the Oculus 3D headsets which really showcases one of the police training modules that Victim Support Europe have been involved in developing, is available for trial around at the back of the room. So please try and take an opportunity over lunch if you can to test that out. And thank you. Lunch awaits.
Everybody, in the end from me, this conference, The Age of Resilience, has been about you, Victim Support Europe's members and partners, and the many challenges and threats you face. However, it has also been about your innovative approaches, your resilience, perseverance, and the partnerships you are forging in the hope of a healthy future. We have listened carefully to you and your visions to realize resilience. We have learned from your experience. You have once again demonstrated, despite unforeseen challenges, inspiring leaderships and organizational resilience as we contribute to strengthening the rights and services for all victims of crime. But you also have been clear that you need more support and commitment from us. Dear conference participants, as you have well noted, we still face the consequences of the pandemic, fueled by inequity. However, these challenges will not stop once the pandemic is declared over, but we'll understand the urgency of the humanitarian, the environmental, economic, and health threats that lie ahead. I reiterate Victim Support Europe's commitment to promote the voices of victims of crimes in the EU, in the global arena, and at other relevant forums. This annual conference provides us with an opportunity to express this commitment. We also intend to support further cross-border opportunities with victims of crime, with victim support community for dialogue, mutual action, and advocacy. We will also work towards clarification of the laws, policies, and practices we, victim support advocates, need to have in place. I look forward to continuing our conversations and our partnership as we work to build a healthy, resilient future for all victims of crime. Thank you for your participation in our conference in Malta. Thank you to our Maltese hosts and national organizations for supporting in such a brilliant way our first major in-person event since the pandemic. And thank you to the technical supporters and all the visible and invisible assistants. Hopefully, we will meet on our next conference in Berlin. Thank you.
That's it, nothing more. You can go and have a drink now with me. And we can carry on the conversations. Thank you to everyone.
Respect for the people on Zoom.
Yes, that's true. Thank you also to the participants. Thank you there. Thank you to all the participants who are on Zoom as well for listening, for asking questions as well. We're trying to be more hybrid in the approach. We're learning how to do it. I keep forgetting, and terrible. So it's something we're learning about. Thank you, Zoom people. We appreciate your participation. I know it's a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, I think it's expanded our reach to everyone. So thank you. You'll have to have a drink on your own. We're going to have drinks together, and we see you in Berlin. Thank you very much.